Everyone knows about World War II, Hitler, and the Holocaust, but not everyone knows how they came to be. If you don't, you're in luck, because this is about one of the biggest turning points in modern history, the Treaty of Versailles. In 1918, when World War I was clearly lost, the Central Powers were forced to sign a punishing treaty, the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was a turning point in history as it destabilized Europe and led to World War II. This treaty was harsh and severe towards Germany, forcing it to pay insane monetary reparations, disband its military, and give up massive amounts of territory. The treaty was so extreme, the Allied powers would later regret the drastic terms they imposed, because the Germans were not pleased with the terms that the treaty put on their nation, and turned to a drastic solution to help their collapsing country, the Nazi Party. Now, before we get into that, let's take a step back in time to 1882, where three empires met, signing the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, and Italy. This was a defensive alliance between them so that they could be protected against France and Russia, who signed a defensive alliance of their own. Britain was also fearing the rapidly growing German Empire, and they were particularly focused on Germany's challenge to British naval superiority, the High Seas Fleet. After the Balkan Wars, Austria, Italy, and Russia were all struggling for dominance of the region. These things made Europe's tension rise and rise. It was only a matter of time for it to explode. On June 28, 1914, a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip shot and killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife while they were driving through Sarajevo, Bosnia. The Emperor of Austria-Hungary, Franz Joseph, believed that Serbia was behind the assassination. So, the Austrians sent an ultimatum to the Serbians, and upon refusal, the Austrians declared war, starting World War I. There it was, Germany and Austria versus Russia, Serbia, and France. Now, you may be wondering, what about the British? Well, the British had an interesting way into the war: Belgium. Belgian neutrality was guaranteed by the British, so when the Germans wanted to knock France out of the war first, they invaded Belgium to get to France faster. The British sent the Germans an ultimatum to remove their troops from Belgium, which the Germans ignored. After the deadline, Britain declared war. After the invasion of Belgium, the war became a stalemate with trench warfare, and the Western Front stagnated. The Italians left their Triple Alliance for the Allies, since they were promised Austrian and Ottoman land if they joined, opening yet another front for the Central Powers. After massive Russian casualties, the Russian people rose up and ousted the Tsar. They signed a treaty with Germany in 1918, ending one front of the war for the Germans. In 1918, after the Allies started to break through the trenches and resources were dwindling, the Germans knew that defeat was inevitable. Both sides of the war were exhausted, and Germany was having internal problems, so in 1918, Germany sought an armistice, signed on November 11, 1918. The Paris Peace Conference marked the beginning of the end for the German Empire. The conference was mainly controlled by France, Britain, the US, and Italy, the Big Four. Driven by their own national interests and anxieties about a resurgent Germany, the Big Four dominated the conference, imposing harsh terms on the once great empire. While the Big Four dominated the treaty's drafting, they had different goals for the treaty. While France had sought to severely punish Germany, Woodrow Wilson wanted a peace without victory, where they could have a more democratic Germany and peacefully reconcile them into a functioning country, supported by Wilson's 14-point speech. They wanted these key points to be in the treaty. Open diplomacy. No more secret treaties, but open agreements to avoid future conflicts. Freedom of the seas. Unrestricted use of the seas for all nations, promoting trade and economic cooperation. Economic equality. Remove trade barriers and equal economic opportunities for all nations. Arms reduction. Wilson urged for a significant reduction in armaments among all nations, minimizing the threat of military aggression. Self-determination. Wilson advocated for the right of oppressed peoples to determine their own governments and borders, addressing historical injustices and promoting political freedom. The League of Nations. He envisioned an international organization dedicated to collective world security, resolving disputes peacefully and mediating conflicts to prevent future wars. In the end, most of the terms set on the Germans were devastating and crippling, including massive territorial losses, crippling reparations, massive demilitarization, exclusion from the newly formed League of Nations, and a term called the Guilt Clause. The Guilt Clause forced Germany to take blame for the war, for which they were not solely responsible for, turning the public eye against Germany to seem like the agitator of the war. The Germans called the treaty a diktat, meaning that the Germans had no say in the terms of the treaty, and that it was a forced peace. Still, they could not reject it, as the Germans were on the verge of collapse and the people wanted peace. Now, imagine how the average German felt, the victorious allies gathering in Versailles, forging your country's future, which you have no say in. As you can tell, the Treaty of Versailles did not only end the war, but planted a seed of resentment and hatred towards the unfair terms and the authors of the treaty. The treaty was humiliating and the population was furious. This anger made the Treaty of Versailles the turning point that it was. The newly formed Weimar Republic, a democratic German government with large monetary reparations and territorial losses, were enraged by the treaty, and it massively destabilized the country. There was also something called the stab in the back myth, where right-wing parties, like the Nazis, said that the German army was undefeated, but betrayed by the socialists and Jews. This was only the beginning of the blame on Jews and socialists. Nationalists and extremist parties took advantage of the political and economic instability to blame the Jews and socialists for Germany's problems. They falsely blamed the two groups for ruining the economy, controlling the media, and controlling the government, which only enlarged German anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism was already present in Germany, as even before World War I, the Jews often faced social and economic discrimination. After a bitter loss in the First World War, the persecution was intensified, with the Jews being blamed for the ruined economy and unstable government. This anger towards Jews became fuel for extremists like Hitler and the Nazi Party. These parties rose to power because they promised to restore Germany's former glory and to tear the terms of the treaty to shreds. After coming to power, Hitler did just that. He remilitarized Germany and annexed Austria and Sudetenland with little resistance, for the world was in fear of another war. The appeasement bolstered Hitler's confidence, leading to the invasion of Poland, World War II, and the atrocities of the Nazi Party. Not only were the Germans struggling with the aftermath of the war and the treaty, but so were the so-called victors of the war, including Italy, one of the Big Four. Italy had been given little of what they were promised that caused them to join the war, making the people of the country angry. This led to the rise of fascism in the country and the first fascist leader becoming head of government, Benito Mussolini. As well as most countries owing each other money after the war, and Germans defaulting on their reparations, ruining their own economy, the world fell into the Great Depression, which influenced the world and devastated most economies, including Britain, France, and the US. Now, you may be wondering, how did the treaty cause this, and why was it a turning point? Well, it lies in the terms of the treaty itself. 1. The treaty was punitive. The treaty's goal was to punish and destroy the chance of a German nation, not to rebuild it better. 2. The treaty was humiliating, causing the Germans to feel embarrassed on the world stage. And 3. The treaty was unrealistic. The reparations were never going to be paid. They crippled the German economy, causing them to default on their payments, and that led to hyperinflation, which partly caused the Great Depression. The Treaty of Versailles changed the course of history, some parts for the better, some parts for the worse. Its brutality towards the Germans caused much resentment and distaste for the treaty. Its unrealistic terms set the stage for the rise of Hitler in World War II, making it one of, if not the most, important turning points in modern history.